again, and it creates different separate clips. So we want to go into our on arrival question. And the question that we had was, what questions do you have about the empathy training project? So last week, a bunch of questions came up, appreciated those questions and want to create a framework here for capturing and hearing all those questions. And then we can start answering them and kind of, start hopefully create more clarity for everyone about the project. It's kind of clear in my head, but then transferring that clarity is kind of the next job. So I had I guess I'll start, we can just go down the list here. And mine was, my question is, what is everybody else's question, about the project? So that's sort of one of my questions. And something that came up in our team Wednesday with Jess and Alex was, how will people take the training? Will it be on their own? For example, is the training there and someone as an individual takes it, or is it a group, like a self-led group, or is it a group with a facilitator? And so that was one question that I jotted down from there. And actually, we won't answer the questions so much as just kind of pose them for now, and then kind of flesh out, sort of expand, on those maybe next week too. And then from last week, I copied your question over, Alex, was for each component, would there be interactive elements into it for the structure to be more substantial? Do you remember that question? Mm-hmm. Could you flesh that out a little bit more? Just kind of what were you meaning by that?
Yeah, I guess like just like on some of these MOOC sites or like the learning type online learning things, they'll have some interactive element. Like a lot of times it'll just be a quiz or like a forum or something for talking. But I was just thinking, because you had been talking about this like workbox or this toolbox idea of like having these different components and people could build their own thing. And I was just throwing out the idea of like, if there's some cool little UI things that we could add in. So like, as an example, if you do like mirroring feelings or something like that, like you could have a bunch of little buttons that you like that have different feelings on them, and you like click a feeling that you're feeling or something, and like then other people can click their feelings, and then it can like show which feelings other people are showing. So I don't know, just like yeah, those are random.
Okay, so sort of like as a programmer, you know the computer interface. So if it's a computer interface, can there be like tools that can support sort of programming tools to support the...
Yeah, I think that's where my mind went.
Okay, cool. I will say that I was contacted once by someone from Skype, a programmer from Skype, which is now owned by Microsoft. And he was interested in creating a tool for empathy, right? In that it would be like what you're talking about, have those sort of tools, but have artificial intelligence built in and sort of a feedback loop. So if you're speaking about, sharing something, it's like it would help you find the underlying needs, and it would have like a feedback loop, and, they could be used, bringing in all the different tools of artificial intelligence and stuff. And he got transferred, so the project got, he dropped the project, but I see real potential, as well as, the CEO of Microsoft has talked a lot about the importance of empathy. He's become sort of a champion for empathy. If we can connect with some tech folks, like that, and get some support, there could be a real using, the computer technologies for building on the training would be great eventually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just add that. So, okay, then let's see. we guess we just go down the list here. Do you want, Deborah, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, but
questions?
I'm having trouble finding what I wrote. I thought I saved the tab, but I
can read it for you if you want.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I see Edwin has been offering these groups since 2015. What has been the outcome of these, and are you bringing past groups together, or is this group 2018 group the first group to move forward on a project like this that you're focusing on? How can we incorporate other empathy interests, as in cultivating empathy, conversation, activism, personal, spiritual, business work? I would like to flesh that out.
So I didn't realize you'd been doing this. Well, I just saw an online presence from your Facebook somewhere that you had other groups since 2015. So is this the first time you're focusing on developing a project with these groups?
Yeah, I've done different, various projects using everything. Yeah, doing Empathy Circle. We had a lot of different Empathy Circle groups. I also started doing some workshops with human-centered design, which, empathy is a big component to that. Mm-hmm. And it's actually called human-centered design. It's also called empathic design. And it comes out of the design community. And the idea is anything you design, you need to be aware of the felt experience and the needs of the people you're designing for. And so you go through sort of an empathy phase where you kind of do your research. And so I did a bunch of these groups using that training from IDEO, which is a premier design organization company. And they started the D School at Stanford. So that's a design school at Stanford. So it's got, heavy duty backing. So I've done those kind of groups, but in terms of, I've tried creating kind of trainings and curriculum before, and somehow the structure always I just kind of fell apart. But now with the book, I just love this book because it's just a systematic, step-by-step empathy training. So it's sort of a new project based around Bill's book, which has given it a really nice structure to kind of hold everything together. And so this is sort of a new initiative kind of built around Bill's book, which I find is working really well.
Can I ask
another piece
of that thread? So each group has had their project, and then what comes of that? And is this activism, empathy tent? That seems like a bigger project. That's not just for these groups. I mean, that's bigger project. So I'm trying to figure.
Oh yeah, there's been a lot of different projects, and the Empathy Tent has been sort of a public-facing group out in, on the streets, and that project has been going since 2011 or 2013, when Occupy Wall Street, was all over the country. I can't remember when it was, but when they had a Berkeley, occupation. And I took the Empathy Tent there, and for 2 weeks we offered empathic listening and mediation, and so I learned a lot. We didn't have all the tools then because it was very dysfunctional. Occupy Wall Street in Berkeley was just totally dysfunctional. The second day I was there was a knife fight. I mean, so anyway, it was. We tried, and kind of learned, and that was one thing where the Empathy Circle kind of came from, is we had different sort of facilitation that we were doing, and it had like the big group facilitation. I thought it didn't really work well, so the idea was to have small groups where people were constantly using empathic listening with each other, and then you could take a whole bunch of people, break them into small groups. But before we could really try that, the police closed down the camp. But since then, I've been setting up the Empathy Tent, offering listening on the streets, offering Empathy Circle practice, on the streets, and so we keep building that, and then it's kind of grown since Trump came, to office. There's all this political wave that's happened, that we've been going to some of these rallies and offering listening. And then when the right wing has come to Berkeley, we've been trying to listen to both sides as well as facilitate dialogue. So it's, there's a lot of different projects. And this MOOC is like a new project, really based, grounded in Bill's book. And so we can tap into all these other, people that we know. But yeah, I don't know, is that sort of?
Yeah, I was just, I guess I should have said, what's the history? But I mean, what you answered, I couldn't come up with the word, but that's where I was going with it, with that part about that. And so the second part is I'm still feeling the impact of last Saturday's conversation about the comment from you was, this is about activism. And then the other participants spoke up and said, well, there's so many other areas that can be considered. And I brought in, like MBSR started, it has, in just healthcare, it's branched out into lots of other areas. So that stimulated in me ways to put it, other ways to put it that might ring a bell, connect with, not that this isn't, but just for me, it seemed like using the word conversation, cultivating empathic conversations, like what is it? And I like the word dialogue too, but I've just been playing with kind of catchphrases and words, and is how to, not that building a culture of empathy is definitely works too, but I'm just things. I'm a creative thinker, so I always think of other kind of avenues of, for me, that's how I operate.
Yeah, so like how to phrase it in different ways, like what we're doing, as well as, that can be applied in different areas. So like activism can be just going and listening to your partner or your friends, or holding an empathy circle with people in your community. So there's a lot of different ways of seeing activism. Yeah,
but for me, the word activism stirs up, it narrows it to political. And so I've had trouble. So that's why, what's coming out of me is this, well, what about the personal side, the work side, the spiritual side? So that's my, it creates a dichotomy for me.
Okay. So it's like a dichotomy. You see, there's like this spiritual, personal aspect of empathy, and then if we're talking about activism, it takes it into the political. And how do you sort of merge the personal and the political, and what does all that mean? And how do you,
right? And how does it bring in, because it's all going to go touch back to your cores, your beliefs, which are very personal. Whether you believe to the right or the left or whatever you believe. So, how do we encompass all of it?
Well, that's what we'll be exploring kind of in this group, dialoguing about it, and, coming up. For me, I could just say that my family is conservative. They're like, a lot of them are Trump supporters. We actually have family empathy circles, and we dialogue with each other, and it really helps just for, dealing with family issues. And I consider that a form of activism. It's just being active in how we, that we're actively promoting the value of empathy and dialogue, and all the values that sort of flow from that. So
I see that, but I will say, I think a huge part of the population who hears the word activism is going to connect it with a political stance. And so that's why I think these other phrases and words came up.
Okay. So we want to be able to reach all the population, like we want not just people who are politically active, but also people who just want like personal growth and personal connection. So how do we create words and concepts and dialogue around reaching? We want to reach everyone, and how do we kind of able to reach everyone?
Right. So I get reactive around the word activism. And so the positive part is it stimulates me to think of other things.
Oh yeah, so it's like you hear activism, it's like, oh, what is that? It's like get kind of stimulated, but you do, on one hand you're noticing that, and on the other hand it's like stimulates other ideas, and so yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And thanks. Denise, you're next.
So this just has got me really thinking as you were talking about it, that of really separating out the very practical piece. If we're going to design, all of these conversations are really useful and helpful in our thinking about it in the larger picture, but it seems like the real goal is to design a training module based on this book. And what I can say is that we know how, I've been training everything that's in this book. I know the content. I know how to teach people how to do it. It is systematic. And if we treat it like just and I've developed it for online, for in-person, for 1 hour, for 5 hour, for 3 day, for whatever, the same stuff. So if we think that what the real purpose of it's only one small piece of the building the culture of empathy, but if we focus it, it's on, we're going to design a training program for this, then that would be a lot more comfortable for me, because these bigger questions are really important, but it's not going to get us all the way there. So if we decide, and it seems like you've decided that you really want to utilize the book and utilize that structure, then the task becomes much more straightforward. The conversations can be a way of practicing the skills, but it's a skill building program, and you could even call it that. You wouldn't even have to. You could even call it listening well, or learning to listen, or the the art of empathic understanding, and have it be that it's just a skill building program. It's not. You can use it for whatever way you want. You can use it for activism. You can use it for your own personal family relationships. You can use it in any way, but it's like learning a skill. Learning how to ride a bike, learning how to play the piano. You learn how to be empathic. And maybe that would would really make the task much more manageable.
Okay, if I can reflect back what I'm hearing, so there's the bigger, philosophical, bigger picture, and it's pretty big. It's you can kind of keep going at that forever in a sense. But if you're to really get focused and be practical, if we just have this be a skill building project, and then it makes it all manageable and more doable, and you have a huge amount of experience in creating all kinds of different sizes of workshops. Yeah.
I mean, I just was working with the chapter that we're doing this. I was doing it for my online class, my online MI class. So it is, and I'm not saying I'm the only one that can do that. I'm just saying if you choose that, because there's, as you mentioned, you got a whole stack of books there about empathy. There's a lot of different models of empathy, and they all add value. There are really ways, much deeper ways of thinking about it, coming from multiple perspectives that are really valuable. But for designing a free training program that is accessible to everyone, picking something simple and really just going with that to start with doesn't mean you can't add more things to go. It doesn't mean that you can't do that, but it just seems like that would simplify it, and simplify the task of the group. And in response to what Alex was saying about the interactive, when in the model of teaching this, it is you do a little bit of explanation about what it is, or reading the book, or overview, just like you have been with us, overviewing the chapter. And then there is always, sometimes there's a way of watching it. So you might watch an interaction, and there's no reason why we couldn't create some great clips of that kind of interaction that you could show in the training module, and then you would have some way of connecting people to practice, and they would practice that particular skill. And then, you know, maybe they would participate in empathy circles as a way of furthering their practice, or you would have an empathy circle always at the end. But you could, you know, the systematic teaching of it is pretty straightforward. So, and it always involves the practice, because you can't learn to do this just by thinking you're going to be good at it, or thinking that you want to be.
Yeah, so it's like this is a practice, and you have to practice it. You can't read about it. You can't do it. You got to sit there and really. You
can, and it helps, but it doesn't get you out of the practice.
Yeah, it's like, so we got to do the practice, and just having that clear that that's what we're doing is that first component that really creates a sense of clarity, and it's pretty easy to do that. And you've got tons of experience, and we can do that. Yeah, just get right into it.
Well, and I'm not the only one that has experience, but it just, I mean, just because of my connection with Bill and this material, I have a lot of experience with this. There's all the nonviolent communication and the mindfulness, and all those have really great, absolutely fabulous approaches to this whole process. And I think that's really useful. But I just think it's starting with something small and concrete, or relatively small and concrete, is probably would make our task easier.
Okay, then so small and concrete would simplify the process. And yeah, that's exactly I'll just share what kind of how I've envisioned this, is that we have the vision, which is it's a larger vision to build a culture of empathy. And one thing is, if we have the vision, it kind of gives a direction to go, but then we start with exactly what you're saying, just the tasks, the skill building, you practice, you add a component, you do some more practice. So exactly what you're saying is what the task is. But then we also have, a larger vision. We're not trying to create the whole vision. It's like, to get to the vision, we got to do step 1, step 2, step 3. And the book kind of goes through 16 steps. And that's what we kind of want to model, create those steps. So exactly, yeah. So is there anything else, or is that kind of, just?
I guess the only other thing, my other question or my other comment, which I made last week too, is that this has to do with the process of pulling people together to do it. And the fact that what you really want is to be able to utilize all the great skills and strengths that you have here in all the people that are volunteering for doing this. And I know for myself that I have to feel like I'm able to contribute in the way that I can do, and it's really easy to get too many people in trying to do too much and not get it, too many cooks in the kitchen. It's really easy to have that happen, and in ways of being egalitarian, or we want. I mean, of course, we want everybody's input, but it may be that there are teams that work on particular aspects or do things, but it just seems like it can get a little unwieldy. And you're the one wielding, so you may not feel that way.
Okay, so it's like, there's sort of the management issue. Like, how do we bring people together to work effectively and efficiently together? And what's sort of the structure? And if you get too many people going in too many directions, it can become sort of unwieldy. So do you have any suggestions, idea about that structuring and sort of an effective teamwork?
Well, it seems like there's if the decisions are made, a couple of the decisions made about if you're going to go with the simple and straightforward, do a module based on the book, then getting the content organized in a way would be one piece of it, but making the decision about, do we want to do you know, how do we want to reach people with this, and what kind of platforms are you going to use, as other people have mentioned, and how are you going to deliver this content in multiple ways? And I could easily see the content being delivered, because I do it all the time, delivering it in all different platforms in all different ways. And you could, if you got a agreement on what the content was and what the basic practices were and exercises, and put that together, what the actual training content was, then you might have different teams approaching the delivery of that content in a variety of different formats. And you could experiment with them, and you could put them out there, and, you know, put it out there for people to experiment with and see what happened. But so getting the content organized, and then, you know, you've got people just in our group who have vast experience with different types of delivery, and so use that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have Jessica and Alex at the last meeting. They were starting to do research on different platforms, you know, for delivering. There's various educational platforms. Do we use an existing educational platform, or do we design something from our own website? So they're kind of researching the different platforms for.
That's great. So having that sort of technical team that's like a particular team that has a very much of a focus about what's the platform that we're going to use.
Yeah.
And if you're going to deliver it for free, then you also have to really pay attention to what the cost is, because some of those platforms are
we want it. Yeah. So that's going to be an issue. We need something that if we're delivering it for free, that it's we're not paying out. So the other part is the agreement on the content. And so far, the basic framework is the prototype is the book. That we have the book. You read a chapter, and then as just a participant, you learn the empathy circle process, and then you discuss it within the empathy circle. And then there's different exercises, triad exercises that are added, like from the book. So far, that's our prototype that we're using. And then we're kind of going through that prototype and then looking, do we need other lessons, you know, up front? Do we, you know, so.
I would say, from my experience, the most important thing for people to do when they're in the training, especially if you have a synchronous training, we've done it with asynchronous where you pair people up, but the actual practice of the skill. So the empathy circle is really good, but if people are just talking about the book, which is a useful thing to do, that doesn't give them practice in the skill necessarily. And the skills are broken down so that you learn how to actually do reflections and how to expand your reflections. And like this week is talking about guessing, the guessing muscle. And this is it really is like a muscle. Your capacity for being able to be in a reflective space and to be able to convey that is like, you just have to work it. It's a lifelong practice. But that whole concept of that you're really making guesses about what the person means is really important. And you work it, you work that guessing muscle, and you keep working it. So, but the practice, when they're sitting there, when you have them in if you have something synchronous where they pair up in some of those educational platforms, you can put people into groups. I mean, you just put them into pairs and they go and they work their pairs, and then, you know, the facilitator can drop in or whatever, but having a way for people to actually practice the specific skill with each other is useful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
if they get better at it, then they could practice the skills in the empathy circle. They could but to start with, they really need the practice of just focused on that skill.
So there's specific skills, and each of those skills needs to be practiced. And would you be able to lay out what you see as the skills, like the specific skills, like like a list of these are the skills we need to cover?
Yeah, the primary skill is the reflective listening that he's talking about, the whole model of listening of Thomas Gordon, drawing on Roger's work, but the practice of actually doing reflective listening is the primary skill that's used. We use, we talk about specific kinds of questions as well, and affirmations, but they're all really a part of developing that capacity for reflective listening. So he's working on that here, and that's the primary. The reflective listening, and he has the forming. He talks about questions, reflections, deepening reflections, affirming. So he's got all of those skills in there that we focus on. But the reflective listening is the primary one, and that in the way that it is talked about, in the way Carl Rogers talked about it, was the reflective listening is the primary skill used to convey empathy. So
yes, you're saying that the reflective listening, the empathic reflective listening, is kind of like the core skill.
Yep.
And that's like essential, and you got to do it, and you got to practice it, and then you can kind of get deeper. And so that is, in terms of what we're doing with the empathy circle, that is the practice, right? It's just practicing that empathic listening, and how do we bring people to get better and better at it? And a lot of it is, a small group. You have that dialogue about the book. And then also what I'm noticing is that kind of personal issues do kind of, deeper issues do slowly arise, and then so you get better at that. So
well, and in the way that we do this in training, for each one of those practices, we have people talk about things like their values, their strengths, things that they really want to change about themselves. In learning this, you use yourself and you bring yourself, so you are experiencing the feeling of being listened to at the same time as you are practicing listening to someone else. So, but it's very structured. You structure it so that that you actually have that interaction that promotes that you are practicing the skill, and that you're also experiencing having that skill. Because the way that he talks about it here is that it's like if you haven't got a way of expressing the empathy, it's lost. It's useless. You can feel empathic, but if you aren't able to convey that to the person that you're working with or sitting in front of you, it's lost. So
okay, great. Then we've jotted all those issues down. We've shared with everyone. So. Thank you for that. That's exciting to have all those points articulated. So, Jess, would you like to share yours?
Sure. I have a bunch of questions, but like you said, it's a question that I was thinking about that needs very close to what Denise is saying. Question about deadlines and goals and tasks that needs to be completed. I need to be very practical and very concrete about. I'm feeling very inspired by Denise, which I'm kind of want to talk to you afterwards, Denise, because I want to build. I want to learn how to create trainings based on books or whatever, and. So my question is what kind of goals and tasks we need to lay out to know what platform do we want to use? Do we have a budget? Is it going to be completely free, or do we want maybe certain things that could be people can pay? Would it be an open MOOC like Duolingo, it's a platform when everybody is creating the MOOC together, or it's more something we want a small volunteer team who are doing it, or it's more like an open source concept? Are we offering kind of like a certificate in the end to say, yay, good for you? Is there already, I know you mentioned that Edwin, that in your opinion, there's not really a clear empathy training that exists out there. It's very accessible. So that's why you thought of this book was giving a structure. But I was curious to know if there was actually already some empathy training that exists that we can look at the structure of how they do it, which Denise, basically you were saying, yes, you're already doing empathy training. And I think we need to know what people are doing so that we can know how to build a training. Do we want like something completely focused with just videos and stuff, or do we want a facilitator? And the last few questions I had was like, how do we going to track progress for participants? Because I sit with my clients where I'm trying to realize like coaching is great, but if they don't see where they started and they don't see the progress, they don't feel they actually have made any progress. But in that kind of skills like empathy, which is so soft that how do you cannot really track that with numbers, you know? So how do you track your progress with empathy? What kind of solution people want to see in their life concretely? Mm-hmm. And my last question was, who do we need to ask help with? Who do we need to get in touch with to ask for help? And you mentioned that already, Edwin, like tech people who already have done training in the past. I think we need to reach out strategically to know like what we're missing. Because I don't think we need to start from nothing. We just need to get the help. We need to know how to do that instead of starting from scratch. There's a lot of very skillful people who can help us bit by bit. So that's what I came up with.
Okay, that was a lot of questions. Hard to reflect all those. I was trying to give a little reflection for each person, but so there's a wide variety of kind of questions and that we can work on and track. In terms of resources of other resources, there is. I'm going to put the link. Actually, I'll put it into the doc at the end. And I'll put it into the chat window. I have been gathering training materials, sort of academic training materials. If you click through that, it has all the sort of the academic resources, as well as it's like well over 300 papers, academic papers, but it's really about the doing of it. The academic, you can read academic papers till you're blue in the face. It doesn't kind of make you better at empathy. So from my experience, at least. And then there's some other links too that I can put in about resources on existing empathy curriculum. So, to kind of follow up on those. Yeah.
There's one thing I'd like to add about the empathy circle, and I think I was always unclear from the beginning about that piece, doing the empathy circle and talking about the book as a way to practice empathy. It always confused me, this way of doing it, because I found that empathy in circle is a skill in itself, doing an empathy circle, which is a great way to practice empathy, but using that every time, I see that the purpose was to use it with the book, but for me it was confusing. Like, if I want to practice the try it in a book, which for me it's, if we stick with the book and keep it simple, we want to practice what's in the book, and empathy, and adding the empathy circle while forming reflections. I always confused me, for example, or roadblocks to, like, when we did roadblocks to listening, we just stick to the roadblock to listening, and that was clear to me, and that was easy to practice. But adding the empathy circle, for me, it's adding a whole different skills in a skill set, which is confusing as a participant. So I would use empathy circle maybe in the end of I don't know, for example, in the end of a 2-hour training, and let's do an empathy circle and see how the training was for you. I would understand that better than use the empathy circle for each skill from the book. That's very confusing to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's like using the circle like all the way through in each, like for the whole meeting is sort of confusing. Like there's like the try it's or sort of exercises, and they don't like fit into the empathy circle. It's like maybe discussing it at the end would work, but there's a sense of confusion.
Yeah, because you're learning through, it's like for me, you're learning a skill through another skill. For me, being in an empathy circle is about practicing empathy, and if I need to practice asking questions, I don't see how I can practice asking questions in an empathy circle. I mean, it's possible, but how am I going to really practice asking questions in an empathy circle? It's practicing a skill in a skill for me, and I find it's not simple and might confuse people. I know I was confused.
Uh-huh.
And I realized now why I was confused is because we were doing that format of empathy circle while practicing also the skills of the book.
Mm-hmm. So kind of combining the skills of the book with an empathy circle just creates a sense of confusion.
Yeah.
And so I'd like a sense of ease, like how to make it easy and not so.
Yeah, especially if we want to stick to the skills of the book, like it sounds like Edwin from the beginning said, this book is the structure for a MOOC. You want to use that as a base. That's what my understanding was. Like, this is the foundation of a MOOC, and you're going to use the 16 chapters as each of them is going to be a skill to practice. If we stick to that, that's okay. But if we add the empathy circle, it's adding another skill for me.
Okay, so there's sort of like following the book just straight through the way it's structured, and which it's not geared, it's not designed for an empathy circle, around an empathy circle. So I think maybe is that kind of like the confusion, that it's like if we just follow the book, do the try-its, I don't know if I'm getting that.
Yeah, like for example, empathy circle, I would say once you've gone through the whole training, as an example, you have a better idea what reflection is, how to actually do empathy. Then I would do an empathy circle, and then everybody can share whatever is on their mind.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you have to go through the full book before you do an empathy circle.
I'm not saying you have to. What I'm saying is I think that would make more sense to use empathy circle as maybe a way to solidify a training this way, but not using empathy circle as a way to learn another skill every time.
Okay. Yeah, so that's something to discuss. I had sort of thought of the empathy circle as the core, because I found the empathy circles are a real good practice and easy. And so kind of how to integrate the empathy circle and learning of new skills is sort of a question for me. So this is like, that would change my whole thinking framework. And so I have to kind of like integrate that, like maybe even seeing how it would look. For me, it's the empathy circle has been the easiest way of just starting to practice. It's like anybody can create an empathy circle, like with minimal experience. We can bring it out to the streets. We could, like one person that is in our empathy tent team, he lives in Petaluma, California, and they've been having some community issues. So a cafe that is kind of community oriented, they brought him in to hold empathy circles. So the community had, like 25 people came, to talk about this issue. He quickly taught a few people how to lead an empathy circle. And then he had those 25 people divide into small groups in empathy circles of, 4 or so with a facilitator. And they were quickly able to get them to start doing empathic listening with each other. So I've just seen that the empathy circle is something that can be quickly brought into a group, and you get kind of like immediate benefit from doing this empathic listening in a small group, and I've seen it with mediation and so forth. So that's what I was trying to organize around an empathy circle, as sort of the practice. And then how do we bring in other skills over time, so your empathy circle practice gets deeper and deeper. And I see Denise, it's like Denise had
I really appreciate what Jessica is saying. And the thing is that I don't see that you have to necessarily wait till the end, but that you have to have specific focus on the skills that's outside of the empathy circle. Like that, the empathy circle is a useful place to practice what you're learning, but to actually learn how to do reflective listening, an empathy circle is not going to teach you that. So the practices, it might be a combination. Like you always have a skill practice that you're working with pairs, or you're in triads, or some way that you're working with each other to practice that skill. And then you can go to the empathy circle and have something to utilize, something to try out. But the empathy circle itself is probably not the best place to learn how to do reflective listening. And honestly, when we've been in our practicing in this group, while there's a lot of really great empathy that's been expressed, the actual skill of reflective listening hasn't always been there. There's a lot more happening besides reflective listening in those empathic circles that is going on. So they're different in a way than just what the listening is focused on. So it does, and that may be a really good thing, that you have both, that you have other things happening and people sharing stories and people, coming together about things, but they're different from what that skill is. So,
Denise, I would love to hear when you say reflective listening is not occurring in the group. What is a good way of bringing forth this reflective listening and getting it into a format? Could you give me an example of what you think would work?
Oh, I think there is some reflective listening going on. There's just other things that are going on also. So from just straight reflective listening, there are other mechanisms, where we do a lot of sharing and we talk about ourselves and our own interactions. And when you're doing pure reflective listening, you are putting yourself in service of the other person, and you are receiving and you are offering understanding. It's like you're the mirror, and that doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're going to do in a conversation, and it doesn't mean that that's there are times when that's not the best thing to do, but that's what the book is teaching people, really how to be that mirror, and it is a different thing from the more interactive pieces that sometimes happen. So, when I evaluate it, I just count, I'm just looking at, I can look at what people are saying and say, that's a reflection. That's not. There you got a question. There you got this is a deeper guess. This is a deeper reflection. This is just repeating. And so there's ways of measuring that, but that are probably not germane to this conversation, but.
So you're seeing that within the circle, that not everybody's doing a real empathic guess. They might be bringing in some of their own stuff, or it's just reflection. So you can see that it's not that there's skills that could be deepened with.
Right.
Yeah.
And that conversation may be really valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable for the empathic circle, for the empathy circle, because it may be that there's more that happens in those empathy circle of value than just the listening piece. But to train people to really actually be able to listen, then you kind of have to isolate that skill and really focus on it.
Okay. Deb?
Yes, I see what you're saying, and in the weeks that we've been gathering. Where I see it is, I've had an interest in sort of jumping further into the book than where we are, and I've had an interest in consolidating the chapters. I'm frustrated with, having a page and a half, to review for a week. So I've been wanting to go further, yet I feel where we're at, if we're really just following the chapters and the model, is that we are where we are supposed to be. We're supposed to be novices who know nothing about this and then just take it like the babe's first steps. But also in the time that we do our 5 minutes, and we do 2 rounds of that, I see there's been, you know, some are more skilled than others, but there has been that 5 minutes of reflective listening. And then, but I hear you saying that, I think, you correct me, is that it takes more than 5 minutes, 2 rounds of 5 minutes to build your skill at reflective listening. And, but I see we have been doing that. It'd be interesting to know how to correct someone if they haven't reflected back when they say, oh, that reminds me of a time, and they just start interpreting instead of just kind of logically. And the beauty of the chapter today that I really appreciated, which I've spoken on before, is that I love as a nurse, you look at everything as objective, and you look at outcomes. So speaking to outcomes, Jessica, it's been brought up in this group before, and I'm very much interested in that, how to measure outcomes in this, whether people feel successful or not. That could be just personal interpretation. But anyway, how do we look at that? How do we say, time out? You know, you just, you know, broke code, or however you want to say it, and get people back on track. Teach them to do it correctly.
Okay, so it's like you're just kind of posing a question. You're seeing that people are not reflecting or doing empathic listening, you know, kind of accurately, or they're kind of breaking, they could deepen it. And how do we teach, you know, how do we change, you know, how do we kind of address that so they can do deeper empathic listening? So I am feeling a little concerned. We have Alex too. We haven't heard from Alex, and I want to be sure to get continue on. So so you want to share your questions, Alex?
Sure. I feel like this was a productive conversation, so I feel bad to sort of like derail it with my questions. But
Okay.
I guess, the one thing that I was thinking about is like, so I don't know if this is necessarily like an intention of this, but if you were trying to bring this to companies or something, you know, to teach people who are working together to be more empathic, that wouldn't be necessarily like the activist side of it, but it would be more of like using this practically in a company or in a work environment. My question is sort of just how do you do like a practical, you know, sell of this? You know, if you were trying to go to a company and you had some online course for empathy training and you wanted to be like, you know, we want to get this whole company signed up to it or something, like how would you talk to the management at the company to get them to like be like, okay, yeah, we're going to put all of our employees through this and like pay for all their time and all that kind of stuff. And I guess the reason that I'm thinking that is because with the team that I work with, it's pretty small teams, like 13 people. And I'm always kind of thinking about like, I wish we would use this stuff more. But like nobody pretty much on the team has any exposure to any of this, to NVC or anything. And I could just imagine, you know, like the mirroring, you know, like mirroring your body gestures or something like that. Like that would be totally awkward for like most of the people on the team. So I was just like wondering how you would start to engage people who are very not into this kind of culture.
Okay, can I reflect that just to start with? So what I'm hearing is you're wondering of how to make the case for empathy training, especially sort of the marketing of it, and get people engaged in it, especially in companies. And you're just seeing from your own teams that, you know, that they could benefit from it. How would you bring it up? You know, have them have the motivation, you know, how do you tap into their motivation for doing it, make the case? But you're knowing that some activities like the mirroring would be kind of too woo-woo or something for them. So it might not work for a company. So you're just kind of sitting with that, holding that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of these people don't even want to even mention emotions. Like, they don't. It's just awkward. We were trying this thing where, like, the beginning of the week, you would just talk about your progress and how you felt about it, and everyone was just like, I feel good. I feel fine. Yeah, feels good. Like that's the most you would ever get out of anyone. Like, so yeah.
So in the corporate or business world, people are kind of don't really want to share feelings and emotions, and how do you kind of overcome that?
Yeah, just seems like a big stretch for some people. Yeah.
Was there more?
No, that was it.
Okay. Oh, great. So, so for the time remaining, I'd like to go into the empathic listening, or we do empathic listening. Let me just stop the